Welcome back. Thank you for coming back. That's always reassuring. While we're on the break, I realised actually why I put this in here, and it wasn't just to talk about the fact I was killing that off. If you actually look at the entire site, it's about 35 items long. And albeit an arbitrary scoring system for this tool, that one site of 35 things, they've graded at 1.5 million points. Which, that's not really giving you any context until I tell you that the entire environment I scan is only 2.5 million. So that one site is the biggest proportion. So things mount up really quickly. And it might be that you've got some big things at the top, and it might be that you've got loads of smaller risk items. But just having the idea and the insight into what's going on can be really helpful for working out where to solve some of those problems and knock them on the head. Okay. So I've shown in there how there's different scoring systems, either the CVSS, which is fairly standard, or the tool will have its own. One of the important things is that we as professionals then grade that risk ourselves. So you're going to have to use your knowledge of the environment to do that. So once you've got your asset register, or you know what systems you're running, or you know perhaps that that's a web server on the public internet, but that's a web server that 2 people can access, that's when you can start applying some form of intelligence to what you're going to do. So you've got to really consider that. The vendor might turn around and say, this vulnerability is absolutely critical, that VMware one as an example. If somebody can exploit that, they can install code in your hypervisor environment, they can start doing things. But if the only way to get to that vulnerability is to be sat at a particular computer in a room and there's no networking access to that side of it, that critical might become a low. But you've got to think about it, and you've then got to make sure that, okay, well, if I've decided that it's really a low, what happens when somebody puts that on the network? That low becomes critical again. So you've really got to keep track of what's going on. So I mentioned the common vulnerability scoring system. 10 is the most severe. 1, 0 would be the bottom. And just having an idea, because that will be a base score that these tools give you. You can then take a temporal score, which takes some additional stuff into consideration, at which point that's when you're applying your knowledge of the environment and you're getting, for you, the truth as to that vulnerability. And different vendors will have different grading schemes. So Nessus, for example, if you've got a website that is running TLS 1.0, it will scream at you that this is really, really bad, and it's worse than not having any encryption on the website at all. That doesn't make sense. Other tools will go, you've got no encryption on that, that's really bad. This one needs some work. So it's just being careful that you know what your tool is saying and then being able to interpret those results. So some examples here. Open database access, CVSS score of 4.4. Insight will give that a 586. So my question to you is, what's in that database? It's an open database, so in theory anybody can connect to it, anybody can query it, pull information out, maybe put information in. What's in there? If it's just a list of cute fluffy cat videos on YouTube, almost who cares? You're going to be able to perhaps get a list of videos you can sit there and have a giggle about. Doesn't really matter. If that's your entire company staff database, including all their salaries and where they live and what additional access requirements they need, that's really quite bad. At which point for me, that CVSS score of 4.4, fairly run-of-the-mill, middle ground, that would become a 10. Maybe a 9, because if it was on the internet, then that would definitely be a 10. But it's having that knowledge of what you're working with in order to see, well, how do we need to change things up? The TLS server supporting an old version of TLS that I mentioned a minute ago. 2.6, arbitrary points, 499. There is definitely room for improvement here. If you're running something that has to be PCI DSS certified, you can no longer get away with that. You will have to be TLS 1.2 or above. So again, the risk might still be low for you, but from a business perspective, that priority might go up because perhaps they want to get certification for the current PCI DSS. So they'll be saying to you, okay, come on, the audit's happening in this time, we need to get that sorted, what can you do? And then you've really got to hope that anything that system touches is going to be okay. So we went and disabled a load of problematic ciphers on one system and found that some third party that's really important to one of our customers couldn't talk to them anymore, which was a bit of an awkward moment. We had two options at that point. Start getting lawyers involved and saying, this is your fault, you need to go and fix your thing that talks to our mutual client. Or I could roll over and say, okay, when are you going to have it done? September, great. We'll allow it until September. They've missed their deadline. Very annoying. Now they're looking at January. But this is why you have to track these things, because they can slip. And I'm sure we've all had projects that have slipped and slipped and slipped. And I've lost count of the number of times I've been told by certain departments, that thing will be gone by next month. Next month was 6 months ago now. But because you've got the information, you can sit there and you can see what's happening. Unencrypted telnet. It's been graded higher up the chain. So there's some questions to ask. Why is telnet on there? Do we need it? And so much of what I do can come down to, does it need to be there? So if I'm logging a ticket to say, you've got telnet, can you make that SSH? The other thing I shall write in there is, if this doesn't need remote management, take that off. Get rid of it. Don't put SSH in, don't have telnet in there, just get rid of it. Because then the risk is gone, the vulnerability is gone, everybody's happy. People that like looking at graphs look at nice graphs because the line is going down. So you've got to consider that. Because telnet is unencrypted, you could intercept that traffic and read it in the plane. And if I had a little box here, we could do a little demo with that, but I didn't have a chance, I'm afraid, to bring that one in. Boo! Boo! There we go. Okay. SMB service, so Windows file sharing, supports the deprecated SMB v1 protocol. So we're starting to go up 5.8 from where we were. The arbitrary score, that hasn't changed much, which just shows you how these things can be quite arbitrary. Well, SMB v1 is 30 years old. It's something, it's at least most of my life old. It's not secure. There are plenty of ways to attack that. Microsoft don't even enable that in their default operating system anymore. When you get that and you've installed it, it's not enabled by default. So you don't really want to be finding that. But it'll be in there because there'll be a legacy system somewhere that somebody has gone, that only does this thing and it really needs to talk to that over there. And then you're in a problem. How do we deal with that? So, okay, we've got a 5.8, we'll call it 6 for easy maths. It's pretty high, getting high up there. But what can we do to get around this problem? We can't take it away because the business is saying it's really critical to them this works. It might be a printer that just scans the paperwork the legal team receive and that printer puts it on a server and the printer only talks version 1. And they need to be able to scan those things, and a new scanner, thousands, for want of an example. You're not going to win against the business unless you can prove that them spending that money is going to make them money in the long run. That's my general experience. Or if you work for a local government, which is where I was before, you're just not going to have the money to spend. It's not an option. So you have to sit there and work out what can we do instead. And it might be that you isolate it. You put it on a separate network that can only talk between those two devices. Or you perhaps put a little gadget in the middle. So there was one piece of software to deal with this, where somebody had made a Raspberry Pi that can only talk to the printer. So they talk at version 1. And then the other side of the network that the Raspberry Pi can see goes off and talks to the servers that the rest of the world in the organisation can see at a higher level. So they've taken the risk away. They've made it so that the equipment that's really old can still work. But as far as everybody else is concerned, it's really new and shiny, and it's great. So they've taken the risk away. But again, there, the risk, the priority, the grading you give it, might not be the risk itself, it might be the business impact. Okay, a Windows server published with remote desktop to the public internet. Anybody used remote desktop? Nobody. I don't believe that. There we go, okay. Anybody been foolhardy enough to put their remote desktop server straight on the public internet? No one's going to confess to that one. Okay. So remote desktop, for those of you who haven't used it, it will give you a full desktop. You can then log into it, use it like it was your normal computer. Really handy in some scenarios if you want to have everything in one place, patch one device that is your remote desktop server, because surely only having to patch one thing's easier, right? Unless you do that. And it might have a password policy that's the default for some versions of Windows, 8 characters, capital number, punctuation. Password with a 0 and exclamation mark passes. So at that point, your password policy is kind of a bit weak. So what do we think about that? How would we grade that? The server's got company data on it. It's not just a database of fluffy cats. Where would you put the severity for that? Don't worry about the numbers, but in terms of like critical, high, medium, low, don't care, where do you want to put it?
Low, surely.
You say that just as I drink. Why are you going low?
It just hits boxes, doesn't it? It just ticks the boxes in numbers, special character. I'd assume it was quite low.
Do you mean the risk to the organisation is low, or do you mean that the password is low
Password.
good? Okay, the password's low quality. Yes, absolutely, I agree. In terms of having that server on the internet with that password, all your company data, anyone can get to it, is that really bad? Okay, tell me next week, where are we thinking?
I'm unplugging it.
You're unplugging it, yeah, I have been there.
How many expletives can we use?
How many expletives? Well, as you have to edit the video, Alex, how many expletives would you like to bleep out?
Oh, yeah, can't be asked.
You can't be bothered, okay. But you might argue that this sounds really dumb. I mean, we're all joking about it. It sounds really dumb. Surely no one ever does it. They do. So this is a set of screenshots from a system called Showdown. And all Showdown does is it sits there and it scans the internet to say, what are you doing right now? And it'll go and talk to an IP address and say, tell me if you're a web server, tell me what you're listening on, tell me geographically where you are, because you can work it out from the IP address. And Showdown's there for anybody to use. I didn't log in to see this. So we could go to Showdown right now and say, show me remote desktop servers, and there they are. They're just on the internet. I've blacked some of them out because there are details on there that tell you the company that owns them, or the name of the person. So administrator, fine. Another administrator, not so bad. That's the default account. Well, this one up here, for a start, it's Windows 7 Professional, so that's been out of support 3 years. Thank you, somebody's nodding, it's always reassuring. But their names were under those. So you could immediately start to identify who this is, and because you know geographically where it is, if you really wanted to, you could try and find their address and turn up and say, hi, by the way, you've got this online. Don't do that, that's stalking. But this information is just there. And this comes up because somebody goes, oh, I really need this. I'll just put it on the internet and I'll fix it later and I'll secure it later. But it happens. But if you're not checking for it, you're not checking your firewall configuration, you're not perhaps checking where people log in from and how often, whether or not they're logging in at the time of night that you actually operate as a business, then this happens. And it's possible some of this was because of the pandemic. A company said, we need remote working right now. And somebody went, oh, I'll just do that. But unfortunately, it does happen. And Showdown will show you all sorts of other things. So there are plenty of CCTV cameras published to the public internet that you can look at. I don't recommend that you start controlling them, but the feed is there. Some of them will let you sit there and pan a camera from left to right or up and down or turn it off. So if you were a criminal and you worked out that where you wanted to break into and rob had that, you could perhaps point the camera at the sky and no one will ever see you coming. And similarly, you might be able to log into a photocopier if somebody's put it online. And some photocopiers will allow you to download documents that they've copied. So you might end up pulling down copies of people's medical reports or their police reports or whatever's going on, or it might just be their bank details, at which point you're on to fraud. So sadly, it does happen. Tracking trends. So one of the things that I have to report to the board on is how we're doing in terms of where we were however many months ago. So the software that I use will give me some idea of what's going on. So the grey line is the number of assets that it's scanning, and the blue line is what's happening to our risk based on the vulnerabilities that we've got. So we can look at the risks over time, the vulnerability count over time and how that affects risk. But we can also use it to show improvements. So if somebody goes, don't need that, that costs you £6,000 a year, we want to save money, and go, well, hang on. Over here we had a risk of 5 million, but now we're down here at just about 3 million. Yeah, there's clearly an improvement. And they'll say, oh, but you could do that yourself. And I could. I could absolutely go and log into every single thing that we have and manage and see what it looks like. It's probably more than £6,000 worth of time, because it'd be my salary for the year. There'd be too much stuff. You can also see what you can track the peaks. So that will have just been after the second Tuesday of the month. So it'll be a Windows Patch Tuesday, Microsoft Patch Tuesday. We'll be about there and probably about there, because I run a scan roughly once a week. So I can track those and we can see what's going on. But we do have to consider the whole environment. So whereas you might, for one team, look at just how they're doing, you then take the bigger picture and see what things look like overall. Equally, if somebody's responsible for a single server, this is the, I know this isn't the 1 million, but the first vulnerability scan, I don't know, 430,000. First time the system was commissioned and found it. Some vulnerability management took place there, because all of a sudden we possessed the information to know that some bad stuff has happened. Nobody has installed patches for a long time. So we could get the patches installed and we could rescan, and we see the score come down. So the risk is reduced, the number of vulnerabilities on the device is reduced. That's what we want to be seeing. Then it goes up a bit, perhaps the configuration changes, maybe some information about a vulnerability changes, things get regraded, so things will go up. And then someone will install some more patches, so the score will come down again. In that case, this was an operating system that wasn't supported by Microsoft anymore, and then somebody did an upgrade to a supported version of the operating system. So because patches were now available, down came the score, and it's tracking fairly well. That will have been a screenshot from last year, so it's possible that server doesn't even exist anymore. Which is happy. I quite like signing death warrants for servers. It's a fantastic feeling. So, to conclude before we get to questions, there is business value in having a vulnerability management program, and I don't say that just because if we didn't have one, I wouldn't have a job. I do like having a job, but that is not the only reason for having one of these. You can prove to your customers that you invest in security, which means hopefully you would win some business over someone who didn't. You can reduce your insurance cost. I get this question occasionally from our accounts team where they'll say, do you do this, that and the other, because that will affect the cost of our renewal. And the first year I had to say, well, we don't have that and that yet. And this year I've been able to go, yes, we do have endpoint detection and response now, because you've now licensed that. So our insurance costs came down. So if you can show that you have an idea of what vulnerabilities you have and that you patch them and you can prove it's working, you might find insurance costs come down. And I'll say winning customers. They're going to ask, if they're security focused, or certainly if they work in finance or healthcare, they're going to say, what do you do to make sure that you protect what we entrust you to look after? If you turn around and say we don't do anything, they're going to start looking for somebody else. The important thing is that you need to action what is found. I said at the beginning, it's no point just looking at the pretty graphs. It's true. I mean, I do like data a lot, but if you just print it out and put it on a wall and look at it, it doesn't tell you anything. So you need to take what's there. You need to determine, okay, for my environment, it means this, and then go and speak to your teams accordingly and say, okay, I know you're really busy right now. This thing's actually on fire, and if we don't do something, it will cost us thousands, because the cost of a data breach is not cheap. Unfortunately, I've never worked anywhere, touch wood, never worked anywhere where somebody has broken in and started stealing data. I suspect if I have to do another talk and say, we've just had a load of data stolen, I might find that my job is not the Senior Information Security Officer anymore. But you've got to action those findings. So go to your teams, make a game of it. I've done that before, where I've said to a team, okay, you've got a risk profile in this system of 1 million and something points. Like, you'll win a prize. It might even not be a tangible prize. Like, yeah, well done, you've earned yourself a security team point. That's what we did at one point. You couldn't cash them in for anything, they had no value. But people liked the idea that they were seeing something happen. And they could play against other teams, all in fun. But because you know what's going on and you've sort of rationalised it for your environment, you're not just throwing hundreds of work orders at somebody and saying, go do that. You're saying, I know you're busy, this one and this one please, they're really important, get those done. There's some other stuff coming, I'm not going to tell you right now, you're too busy, we'll get to it later. It's really powerful, because then people realise that you're not just going to be the security guy who sits there saying no, or security girl who sits there saying no. You care about what they're doing, and you want to make sure that everybody works together. The risk score is going to go up and down. I hate it when I have to give the report to the board for a month where it shows that it's done that, because then they start asking questions. So you have to be able to explain that to them. Well, actually, this isn't a game or it's a journey. It's not a destination. There is never going to be a point where you have no risk unless you've gone. It's the only time that you'll ever get there. So being able to interpret it and show them, yeah, things will get worse. Every month, the risk score will jump because the details of a problem get published. Our goal is to reduce risk. I would love to say we could remove it, but I'm a realist and I know you can't get rid of all risk unless, as I say, you cease operating. So that's what you want to do. You want to use this as a tool to help you reduce risk. And then the cost of running a vulnerability management program, it does vary. We've got me dedicated sitting there looking at it at least a day a week, among with other things. Some places have got whole teams of people, but the cost of being hacked is a big variable cost that you're not necessarily going to be able to put on the budget sheet. So if it happens to be something that you are in a position to run in your organisation, go for it. You can do it cheaply just by having a look at what you've got, or there are tools out there that can help you do it. Thank you very much. Any questions? Go for it.
That was really interesting.
Thank you.
Have you got a feel for what's, you mentioned around the variable price of being hacked, have you got a feel for what's kind of the worst that can happen? Is it theft and then fines and then what's the worst that
So,
is worried about?
it would depend on the country that you are operating in and what industry you're working. If you're in a regulated industry, then not only have you got potentially your information commissioner, so in England the Information Commissioner's Office, having a go at you. I think GDPR fines from the ICO are up to 4% of gross of your. Thank you. It's not gross domestic profit. It's gross profit.
Gross turnover.
Thank you. Gross turnover. So you could stand to lose 4% of your gross turnover if the ICO decide that's a really big problem, and you've got 72 hours to tell them this bad thing's happened and someone's stolen the information. But if you're then regulated, you might find that actually, okay, you're a bank, so the Financial Conduct Authority is going to turn around and go, we want some money as well. And then you've got the loss of reputation and your customers who are going to go, don't like that, I'm going somewhere else. So the worst thing that can happen, you lose everything. DigiNotar is an example of a certificate authority who did some bad things and went bust. They had no choice but to close. LastPass lost loads of customers when they got hacked, didn't bother to do much about it, didn't tell anybody, then did tell everybody, but didn't really tell everybody, and then it just went on and on and on, and they lost a load of customers. So the worst thing that can happen is, bye-bye. You are not a business anymore. Alex?
That's just, you said you've got 72 hours to let ICO
Yeah.
know. What happens if you don't?
Right. So if it's a GDPR related breach, so we're talking data theft, not necessarily just someone stolen my fluffy cat pictures. If you've got a data breach, whether or not it's reportable to the Information Commissioner's Office will depend on how much information it was, what kind of information it is. If it's just one person, your data protection officer might decide that's not reportable. If it's a large quantity, or it is deemed reportable, you have to tell the Information Commissioner's Office. You don't have to have it fixed in that 72 hours, you just have to make the initial contact. If you don't tell them, and then tell them later, but they will then say, well, hang on, how long have you known? They will then start going, right, well, that's 1 0 on the fine. And then the longer or the worse it gets, that's another 0. So the fine will go up. What they're pretty good about doing is going, okay, this bad stuff happened, it's not great, but you were trying. So they will take that into consideration. If you just say, we just left the door open and everybody went and downloaded the backups that had all the public, all the personal data in it, they won't look favourably on that. But yeah, 72 hours for the ICO and any GDPR related breach. Other regulators may have other values. So one contract I was looking at recently, the customer, because they are in a regulated industry, has 24 hours to tell their regulator, which means that my timescale becomes 24 hours, which I don't like because there's me. The security team is 5'6", and it does not have the power to tell everybody with their different, but we would have to. So it becomes 24 hours. and then they will take whatever out of their contract. So you broke contract and here is the penalty.
One of the nice things about GDPR is you don't even have to be based in Europe.
Nope.
Because it's based on if it's a European citizen or British citizen, so that there's a breach, then you're covered. It doesn't matter if you're based in Waterloo or...
Which is why a lot of American news sites just refuse connections from IP addresses they see in those areas. It's like, we could implement stuff, we can't involve.
Don't they have trouble enforcing that? I'm sure I heard a story last week, or maybe the week before, about a company that blatantly ignored GDPR, and because they were based in some country where they
obviously,
what are you going to do?
yeah, obviously you always got that risk, but it does mean if a company's going to behave like that, then they behave like that, aren't they? They're a bad actor in the first place.
I mean, that's also going to smash their reputation pieces.
Yep.
If they haven't much anything to begin with. But, yeah, anybody of any size who wants to keep on.
And you've got to be very careful, because as soon as you obviously, if you're having European presence with any description,
I think this was purely online, and they were registered somewhere else, so the ICO in the UK had no teeth.
no. Well, yeah, you're always limited, but then a lot of this stuff is becoming extra virus in that sense, and there's more and more legislation, not just from this country, but it's that you have to, even if you're not operating in the country, you can still end up being subject to that legislation.
Now, whether or not your company decides that they don't care, which I think is what Alex was trying to say at one point, it's like, as with all risks, you can choose what to do with it. So you could go, okay, I really don't like that, that's really risky, how can we never do this again? Great. Like you say, unplugging the server from the internet, fantastic. Never happens again. Little Timmy never plugs that thing back in, happy days. You might choose to transfer that risk to somebody else. So you might just take out extra insurance to pay for it. Or you might look to mitigate it and say, okay, what can we do to make this less bad? Or you might just go, nah, never mind, we'll do it, and hopefully nobody bothers us. Those are really your four options when it comes to risk. And it's the same as we take when we leave the house. Like, there is a risk someone will run me over. Well, I accept that risk by leaving the house. I could transfer that risk by getting someone to pick me up in a tank. The risk is now their tank gets pranged, but I'm all right. So it really depends what you want to do, and what appetite your business has got, and how much money your business has got, and what your lawyers want to do.
Well, and what contracts you've got in place with your customers and suppliers.
Yep.
So do you operate under any of the frameworks like Cyber Essentials Plus, SOC 2, or
27001 is what we're using at the moment. Occasionally we will have someone say, do you do Cyber Essentials Plus? It's one of those things, we could do it, but 27001, you'd hope they would consider beat it.
Well, that's the highest standard.
Yeah, a higher standard, exactly. Not all of our customers necessarily understand that. They just hear about this one. So they want that one, and then you have to explain it to them. Haven't got as far as SOC 2. I can see a benefit with SOC 2 because it will sit there and it will say you do this, we've come in, we've seen you do it now, and then they'll come back after a few months and go, okay, yes, you're still doing it, we've seen it, it's evidence-based. But yeah, for me, it's 27001 at the moment, which is the audit that starts tomorrow.
Yeah, because basically you end up having to monitor your whole supply chain as well. So.
Yeah. Yeah, fortunately, that falls more to my colleagues in the compliance side. I have to get involved with this as a security bit, but yes. But yeah, like people on your side, yeah, it absolutely comes down to, okay, fine, some of this risk comes from somebody else, well, what are you doing about it?
Yeah, some of my best friends were in the InfoSec teams.
You've got to have good relationships. If you work in security, you've got to be everybody's friend, but they need to know that you're scary. Because they won't believe you if you tell them that you're not scary. So just try and be approachable is my advice on that one. And I'm guessing it's probably the same in compliance. Do you want to be approachable in compliance? Oh dear. Any others? Happy days. Either I put you all to sleep or I did an okay job. I'll take that. Right. Thank you.